A 5-year-old girl, alone on New Year's Eve, asked a stranger in a luxury restaurant one question that would change both of their lives forever. The restaurant was warm and glowing, wrapped in soft golden light and the quiet elegance of a holiday evening. Glass ornaments reflected the shimmer of chandeliers, and a tall Christmas tree stood near the entrance, heavy with lights and silver ribbons. Laughter rose and fell around the room as guests clinked glasses and leaned close to one another, counting down the final hours of the year that was ending. At a small table near the window sat a man alone. His dark hair was neatly styled, his blue eyes distant, fixed on the street beyond the glass where snow drifted slowly onto the pavement. He wore an expensive tailored suit, the kind that spoke of success without needing explanation. His name was Michael Hayes, and by every visible measure, he was a man who had won. Yet as midnight drew closer, the empty chair across from him felt heavier than any loss he had ever known. His phone lay untouched beside his plate. No messages appeared. No names lit up the screen. The silence was complete, broken only by the muted sound of celebration around him. Michael took a slow sip of his drink, feeling strangely out of place in a room full of joy. That was when he noticed her. She stood hesitantly a few steps away from his table, as if unsure whether she was allowed to exist in this bright, expensive space. She was very small, no more than 5 years old, with pale blonde hair tucked beneath a red knit hat pulled too low over her ears. A thin red jacket hung loosely on her shoulders, worn and faded, offering little protection from the cold she had clearly just escaped. Her blue eyes were wide and serious, carrying a sadness that felt far too heavy for someone so young. For a moment, she simply looked at him, gathering courage. Then she took a careful step forward. "May I stay with you until midnight?" she asked. Her voice was soft but steady, shaped by need rather than fear. Michael blinked, caught off guard, and set his glass down slowly, as if sudden movement might break the moment. He looked around instinctively, expecting an anxious parent to appear, but no one came. The girl stood alone, her small hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Where are your parents?" he asked, keeping his tone calm. She lowered her gaze, staring at the polished floor. "I don't have any," she said quietly. Something shifted inside him at those words. He studied her more closely now, noticing how her shoes were damp from melted snow, how her cheeks were flushed from the cold, how she seemed to be bracing herself for rejection. The restaurant's warmth had not yet reached her. There was a long pause, filled with music, clinking silverware, and distant laughter. Finally, Michael reached for the empty chair across from him and pulled it out. "Sit," he said gently. Relief flickered across her face, quick and fragile, as she climbed onto the chair, her feet not quite touching the floor. Michael did not yet know why he had said yes, only that for the first time that evening, the countdown to midnight no longer felt quite so empty. For a while, neither of them spoke. The noise of the restaurant flowed around their small table, wrapping them in a strange bubble of privacy that felt almost unreal. Waiters moved between guests carrying glasses of champagne, couples leaned toward one another, and somewhere a group laughed too loudly, already celebrating ahead of time. Against all of that, the quiet between Michael and the little girl felt delicate and careful, as if both of them were afraid to disturb it. She sat very straight in the chair, hands folded in her lap, glancing around as though she expected someone to tell her she did not belong there. Michael noticed how she flinched every time a waiter passed too close and how her eyes kept drifting toward the door. She was watching it not with hope, but with fear, as if she expected it to open and pull her back into the cold. "What's your name?" Michael asked gently, breaking the silence. "Lily," she answered. Her voice was clear, but there was a practiced caution in it, the kind that comes from learning early that words can be dangerous. "I'm Michael," he said. "Are you hungry?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. A little. He ordered food without making a show of it, choosing simple things, warm and easy to eat. When the plate was placed in front of her, Lily stared at it for a moment before touching anything. Then she took small bites, chewing carefully, as if each mouthful needed permission to exist. Michael pretended not to notice, but every movement tightened something in his chest. As she ate, he asked questions quietly, never pushing, never rushing her. Lily told him she liked drawing houses with big windows and that she hated loud noises at night. She said she liked red because it made her feel brave, even when she wasn't. She did not mention where she slept or how she had ended up alone on New Year's Eve, but Michael sensed the shape of those answers in the spaces she left empty. He, in turn, said very little about himself. He mentioned his work only briefly, brushing past the details that usually impressed people. For once, he did not want to be seen as someone important. He wanted to be just a man sitting across from a child who needed company. Around them, the excitement in the restaurant grew. People began to check their watches, counting minutes, raising glasses in practice. Michael felt the familiar heaviness return, the quiet reminder that no one had invited him anywhere else, that no one would be waiting for him when the night ended. Yet as he looked at Lily, carefully wiping her hands on a napkin she was clearly trying to keep clean, he realized something unsettling. He was no longer alone. Lily finished eating and looked up at him, uncertainty returning to her eyes. "I won't stay long," she said quickly. "Just until 12. I promise." Michael nodded, his voice steady. "That's fine. We still have time." She relaxed slightly at that, leaning back against the chair, her gaze drifting toward the lights and decorations above them. Outside, snow continued to fall, silent and steady, and inside, two strangers shared a moment that felt small to everyone else in the room, yet somehow large enough to change everything that came after. As the plates were cleared away, Lily's shoulders slowly lowered, as if the warmth of the food had reached somewhere deeper than her stomach. She swung her legs slightly under the table, the movement small and absent-minded, and for the first time since she had approached Michael, she allowed herself to relax just enough to breathe normally. The restaurant felt less overwhelming now, though she still glanced around from time to time, alert to every sound and movement. Michael noticed the way she kept her back straight, the way she never fully leaned into the comfort of the chair. It was the posture of a child who had learned not to get too comfortable anywhere, because comfort could be taken away without warning. He chose his next words carefully, knowing instinctively that trust, once broken, was not easily rebuilt. "You said you won't stay long," he said gently. "Is there somewhere you're supposed to be?" Lily's fingers tightened around the edge of her napkin. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she shrugged, a small, uncertain movement. "Not really," she said. "I'm supposed to be at the shelter, but I left." Michael did not react right away. He kept his expression calm, his voice even. "Why did you leave?" She stared at the lights reflected in the window, watching them blur slightly as her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "They said it was bedtime," she answered quietly. "They turned off the lights and told us to be quiet. But everyone else gets fireworks and music and hugs on New Year's. I didn't want to lie there and pretend it was just another night." There was no anger in her voice, only exhaustion. The kind that comes from disappointment repeated too many times. "How did you get here?" Michael asked. "I walked," she said. "I know the streets. I wasn't scared. Not much, anyway." That last part sounded rehearsed, as if she had said it before and hoped that saying it enough times would make it true. Michael imagined the cold outside, the snow falling into her hair, the city towering around someone so small, and felt a wave of quiet fury at a world that allowed such things to be normal. Did anyone see you leave? He asked. Lily shook her head. No one was looking. The words landed heavily between them. Michael leaned back slightly, drawing a slow breath, his thoughts racing ahead to consequences and responsibilities he had not planned for tonight. Yet when he looked at Lily, at the way she was trying so hard to appear brave, he knew there was no simple way out of this moment. You know they'll be worried, he said softly. She gave a faint, sad smile. They'll be worried because they have to be, she replied. Not because they miss me. Michael felt the truth of that statement more sharply than he expected. He had built an entire life on obligations that looked like care from the outside but felt hollow up close. Hearing it spoken so plainly by a child unsettled him in a way no business loss ever had. Around them, the restaurant buzzed with rising excitement as midnight drew closer. Someone began counting down the minutes out loud at a nearby table. Lily glanced at the clock on the wall, then back at Michael, anxiety flickering across her face. I really will leave after 12, she said quickly, as if afraid he might change his mind. I just didn't want to be alone when the year changed. Michael looked at her for a long moment before responding. You don't have to worry about leaving right now, he said. We'll figure things out after. She nodded, though uncertainty still lingered in her eyes. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and inside, two lives that had never meant to cross were quietly, irrevocably moving closer together. The closer midnight came, the louder the restaurant grew, as if the entire room were holding its breath and letting it out in bursts of laughter and clinking glass. Waiters moved faster now, balancing trays of champagne while guests leaned toward one another, voices rising with anticipation. Outside the wide windows, the city lights shimmered against the falling snow, turning the street into something almost unreal. Lily watched everything with wide, careful eyes. She kept glancing at the large clock mounted on the wall near the bar, counting the minutes without moving her lips. Each time the second hand passed the 12, her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table. Michael noticed and gently pushed a small bowl of fruit closer to her, a quiet gesture meant to ground her, though he suspected it did little to calm the storm inside her. You can make a wish, you know, he said softly. People usually do at midnight. She looked at him as if the idea had never truly belonged to her. Am I allowed to? She asked. He nodded. Of course. She considered that for a long moment, her gaze drifting back to the clock, then to the window, then finally settling on him. I don't usually make wishes, she said. They don't like it when you hope for things that won't happen. Michael felt a sharp ache at her words, the kind that comes when something painfully true is spoken too simply. You can hope tonight, he replied. Nothing bad will happen if you do. As the final minute approached, a hush began to spread across the restaurant, not complete silence but something close to it. People stood, raising their glasses, laughter turning nervous and excited. A countdown started somewhere near the bar, voices joining in one by one until the entire room echoed with numbers falling toward 0. Lily climbed slightly onto her knees in the chair, her eyes fixed on the clock. Michael found himself watching her instead of the countdown, noticing the tension in her shoulders and the way she seemed to brace herself, as if midnight were something to survive rather than celebrate. 3, the room shouted. 2. 1. At the stroke of 12, cheers erupted, glasses clashed, and someone near the window released a burst of confetti. Fireworks flashed faintly in the distance, their colors reflecting off the glass. Lily flinched at the noise, then froze, as if waiting for something more. Michael leaned closer. Did you make a wish? He asked. She nodded slowly. Yes. What did you wish for? She hesitated, then shook her head. If I say it out loud, it won't come true. He smiled faintly, accepting that answer. But after a moment, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper, as if the truth was too heavy to keep inside. "I wish that someone would be waiting for me," she said. "Just once. So I wouldn't feel like I don't belong anywhere." The words hit him harder than he expected. Around them, people hugged and laughed, living inside moments that assumed warmth and belonging as something natural. Michael felt his throat tighten, a pressure he was not used to acknowledging. He raised his glass slowly, not in celebration, but in quiet recognition of the weight of her wish. Outside, fireworks continued to bloom and fade, marking the beginning of a new year. Inside, something far more fragile and significant had already changed, though neither of them yet understood just how irreversible that change would be. The celebration continued, but for Lily the noise seemed to grow sharper with every passing minute. The cheers and music blended into a restless hum that made her shoulders tense again. She slid back into her seat, pulling her hands into the sleeves of her jacket, her eyes darting toward the entrance each time it opened. Midnight had passed, and with it the fragile safety she had been holding on to. Michael noticed the change immediately. The warmth that had briefly softened her expression was gone, replaced by a familiar caution. He followed her gaze toward the door just as two uniformed police officers stepped inside, shaking snow from their coats. They paused near the host's stand, speaking quietly with a member of staff, their eyes scanning the room. Lily went very still. Her small fingers reached across the table and closed around the edge of Michael's sleeve, not gripping tightly, but enough to be unmistakable. He felt the tension in that simple touch and turned back to her. "They're here for me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Someone must have called. Michael's mind raced. He had expected this moment, had known it was inevitable, but the reality of it unfolding in front of him felt far more urgent than he had imagined. He glanced again at the officers as they began to move through the restaurant, asking quiet questions. Lily's eyes filled with tears she did not let fall. "Please," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Don't tell them to take me back. I'll be good. I won't run again. I just don't want to go back there." Michael pushed his chair back and stood before he had fully decided what he was going to say. His body seemed to move on instinct, driven by something deeper than logic. When one of the officers approached their table, Michael met his gaze calmly. "Is there a problem?" he asked. "We're looking for a missing child," the officer replied, glancing briefly at Lily. "Someone reported seeing a young girl alone." Michael did not look down at Lily. "She's with me," he said evenly. The words hung in the air, bold and undeniable. The officer studied him, clearly surprised, then asked, "Are you her parent?" Michael hesitated for less than a second. "She's under my care tonight," he answered. "She hasn't been alone." Lily's grip on his sleeve tightened, her entire body trembling now. The officer's expression softened slightly, though caution remained. He asked for identification, for details, for explanations. Michael provided everything he could, aware that each answer carried weight far beyond this moment. The restaurant had grown quieter nearby, curious glances stealing their way. Lily stared at the table, her breathing shallow, her hope fragile and fraying. Michael placed a hand gently over hers, a silent promise that she was not facing this alone. After a brief exchange between the officers, one of them nodded. "We'll need to take this conversation outside," he said. "And we'll need to contact social services." Lily closed her eyes. Michael squeezed her hand. "It's going to be okay," he said softly, though he did not yet know how he would make that true. What he did know, with absolute clarity, was that he was no longer willing to step back and let the world decide her fate without him. The cold hit them the moment they stepped outside, sharp and unforgiving after the warmth of the restaurant. Snow crunched beneath their feet as the doors closed behind them, cutting off the distant sounds of celebration. The city felt different now, quieter, as if the new year had already moved on without them. Lily stood close to Michael, her small body tense beneath her thin jacket. One of the officers spoke into a radio while the other crouched slightly to her level, his voice gentle but professional. He asked her name, her age, where she was supposed to be. Lily answered softly, her eyes fixed on the ground, her words careful and precise. Michael watched every exchange, feeling a growing weight in his chest. This was no longer a moment he could influence with confidence and authority alone. These were systems, rules, and procedures that did not bend easily, no matter how powerful he was elsewhere. Still, he remained steady, offering information when asked, clarifying details, and refusing to step away from Lily's side. A short drive later, they were inside a small, brightly lit station that smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Lily sat on a bench, her feet dangling, hands folded tightly in her lap. Michael sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, though neither of them moved. An officer brought her a cup of warm cocoa, which she accepted with a shy nod, wrapping both hands around it as if it were something precious. Social services arrived not long after, a woman in a thick coat with tired eyes and a clipboard held tightly against her chest. She spoke kindly to Lily, explaining what would happen next, asking questions that felt too big for someone so small. Lily answered as best she could, glancing at Michael often, silently checking that he was still there. When the woman turned to Michael, her expression shifted to polite seriousness. "And you are?" she asked. "My name is Michael Hayes," he replied. "I met Lily tonight, but I don't believe that means I have no responsibility." The woman raised an eyebrow slightly, surprised by his tone. "You understand that she can't simply leave with you?" "I do," Michael said. "But I also understand that she shouldn't feel like she has no one." The room fell quiet as the weight of that statement settled in. The woman studied him more closely now, noting the way Lily leaned subtly toward him, the way he kept his voice calm and respectful. She explained the process clearly, outlining what would happen if Lily were returned to the shelter and what steps would be required if anyone wished to become involved in her care. Michael listened carefully, absorbing every word. When she finished, he did not hesitate. "I want to be involved," he said. "In whatever way is appropriate. I'm not asking for shortcuts. I'm asking for the chance to do this the right way." Lily looked up at him then, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and fragile hope. She did not speak, but the question was there all the same. Michael met her gaze and offered a small, reassuring smile. "You're not invisible," he said softly. "Not anymore." For the first time since they had left the restaurant, Lily's shoulders relaxed just slightly, as if the weight she carried had shifted, even if it had not yet been lifted completely. The days that followed moved slowly, marked by uncertainty and waiting. Lily was returned to the shelter, but everything felt different now. She no longer counted the hours until lights out with the same hollow dread, because she knew that somewhere beyond the walls of the building, someone was thinking about her. That knowledge, small as it was, changed the way she held herself and the way she looked at the world. Michael did not disappear after that night. He came when he said he would, always on time, sometimes early, standing a little awkwardly in the shelter's common room with his coat folded over his arm. At first, Lily watched him from a distance, unsure whether this new routine was real or something that might vanish if she believed in it too fully. But each visit reinforced the same truth. He came back. They spent their time together simply. Michael read to her, listened as she talked about the other children, and watched her draw pictures of houses with large windows and smoke rising from chimneys. He learned which stories calmed her and which made her uneasy, which questions she avoided and which she asked over and over. Lily, in turn, learned that she did not have to rush her words or guard every thought. Silence between them was no longer something to fear. The evaluations began soon after. Interviews, background checks, long conversations with social workers who spoke carefully and took notes. Michael answered everything honestly, without trying to impress or persuade. He spoke about his work, his life, and the loneliness he had mistaken for independence. When asked why he wanted to help Lily, he did not offer grand explanations. He simply said that he could not ignore her once he had seen her. Lily was asked questions too, though they were phrased more gently. She was asked how she felt when she was with Michael, whether she felt safe, whether she wanted to see him again. Each time, she nodded, clutching a stuffed toy in her hands, her answers soft but certain. Weeks passed, then months. Progress came in careful steps, never rushed. One afternoon, after a long meeting, a social worker smiled at Lily and told her she would be spending more time with Michael outside the shelter. The news settled slowly into her understanding, and when it did, her smile was tentative but real. Michael prepared his home with quiet intention. He did not buy expensive things or try to fill the space with distractions. He made room instead, choosing soft blankets, small shoes by the door, and a nightlight for a bedroom that had never belonged to anyone before. When Lily visited for the first time, she stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking it all in, as if waiting for someone to tell her it was a mistake. "No one's going to take this away," Michael said, sensing her hesitation. "This is your space." She nodded slowly and stepped inside, her hand slipping into his without thinking. In that simple gesture, something settled between them, not as a promise of what might be, but as quiet acceptance of what was already beginning to feel like home. A year passed, marked not by dramatic moments but by countless small ones that slowly stitched a new life together. Lily learned the rhythms of a home that did not change overnight, where mornings came with quiet routines and evenings ended with stories instead of locked doors. She learned that questions were allowed, that mistakes did not lead to punishment, and that being afraid did not mean being alone. The fear did not disappear all at once, but it loosened its grip, little by little. Michael changed too, though he rarely spoke about it. His world no longer revolved solely around schedules and numbers. He learned to plan dinners around a child's favorite foods, to leave work early for school events, and to sit through long silences without trying to fill them. Some nights he would find Lily asleep on the couch with a book open on her chest, trusting without realizing it, and the sight would stop him in place every time. The legal process continued quietly in the background, paperwork moving forward as steadily as their lives did. When the final approval came, it did not feel like a victory so much as a confirmation of something that had already become true. Lily was no longer a visitor in his life, and Michael was no longer just someone who showed up. They belonged to each other in the simplest, most profound way. On the next New Year's Eve, they returned to the same restaurant. It looked almost identical, with the same lights, the same tree near the entrance, and the same soft music filling the room. This time, however, they arrived together, shaking snow from their coats and laughing as they did. Lily wore a red hat again, new and warm, chosen carefully because she remembered the first one. They sat at the same table by the window. Lily's feet still didn't quite reach the floor, but she no longer sat stiffly. She leaned comfortably against Michael's side, watching the snow fall outside with quiet contentment. "Do you remember what you asked me last year?" Michael said gently. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I asked if I could stay until midnight." "And do you remember what you wished for?" he asked. She smiled, not sad this time, but calm and sure. "I wished that someone would be waiting for me." The countdown began again, familiar voices rising around them. Lily didn't tense this time. When the clock struck 12, she didn't flinch at the noise or the cheers. She simply reached for Michael's hand and squeezed it. "You were waiting," she said softly. Michael looked at her, emotion tightening his chest in a way he no longer tried to hide. "I always will be," he replied. Outside, fireworks lit up the sky, their reflections dancing across the window. Inside, nothing felt fragile anymore. The new year did not begin with hope alone, but with something stronger, something earned. For the first time in both their lives, midnight did not mark an ending, but the quiet certainty of a beginning that would not be taken away.